This is the System Failure Podcast number 54, and we are back with guests.
Yes, we've got an exciting guest for y'all today. The Libertarian Chris has returned and redarkened our doorway. We're delighted to have you, sir. This time, not via remote, but live in person. The man himself.
Live here in Meat Space. Ni hao and Sulamat Pagi. Good morning. I'm delighted to learn that you have a new following of subscribers in Singapore. I hope I've not just terribly butchered your local languages. I'm charmed at the idea that someone across the world is tuning in to listen to your and my thoughts. So, in one sense, I want to congratulate the two of you in reaching a new user base, and I also. For the people that are listening, I really want to applaud the work that you're doing. You guys are out here doing something quintessentially American. You're professing some political and social ideas and trying to make the world a better place. And people are listening. So
that's so nice of you, sir. And I'll echo your salutation to the Singaporeans. Hope you all are enjoying the pod.
All right. Well, some stuff going on. Like when we were recording the podcast last time, Donald Trump was trying to be assassinated.
Yeah. So during the recording of last week's pod, as you said, Brian, I went home and there was like news that someone had been arrested on that international golf course down there in West Palm Beach, and that this was another attempted assassination on the Donald, which is not great for my theory that the first assassination attempt was merely a confused 20-year-old who had absorbed one too many orange Hitler memes. And of course, if you believe that Hitler is about to take power again, then, that lends itself to a certain logical course of action. But now we've had a second attempt. What do you make of it, lads?
Well, my initial reaction was, this is just like another crazy person. And at first, it seemed like not a deep state conspiracy to have the Donald offed. But there's a couple of facts. So it turns out the guy brought tile with him or something to protect against counter bullet shots. And then the dude is obviously he's he was in Ukraine trying to drum up support for the war. And Dave Smith said he had a prior UMD or WMD conviction. Is that true?
Not a WMD conviction. He's a previous felony conviction for an illegally manufactured automatic rifle. So he's a felon.
Right. Well, that's a lot different than a WMD, but
yeah, He's also attempted a couple of times, I think, to enlist in the U.S. military and in the Ukrainian Defense Force, this Ukrainian Foreign Legion that he's drumming up support for. Apparently, he's been denied they've declined to accept his services. So in lieu of that, he spent his time here in the United States trying to drum up support.
Well, Dave Smith was making this point, but it's not just that the level of rhetoric is too high, because it's not maybe the first one, it's some kid who's been on the internet too much. This isn't just some guy, though. It's not the level of rhetoric. The guy is. This guy is some kind of operative or something. Or
well, he seems like a crazy person or an unbalanced person. But that's playbook 101 for the intelligence services, right? You get some unbalanced person. Right? We can see this in the way that the FBI prosecuted things like the attempted terrorist bombing of Times Square in 2008 or whenever that was. And it turned out that there was, or the kidnapping plot for Governor Gretchen Whitmer, right? It turns out that you get some confused loners to actually push the button and do the crime. And there's a group of 12 or 14 people who are making these one or two loners, putting them up to it. And it turns out that all of them are federal informants, of the 14 or 15 people involved in that Gretchen Whitmer plot, 12 or 13 were. Imagine if I'm just imagining if I found out that you two were FBI informants and I was you were all we're going to commit this crazy crime, and then I got arrested and it turns out y'all are federal agents. I'd be like, wow, that is I've known those guys forever. How is that possible? So yeah, it definitely does not seem like. This guy is much older, right? He's not an impressionable 20-year-old. The guy's got to be in his 60s. It's just really stinky. So I wonder, lads, if we are going to move on officially from my notion that this was just a confused 20-year-old with the first. How deep do you think the conspiracy goes here? In my view, I just don't see why the deep state cannot tolerate Donald Trump for another term. The man has he's got all kinds of corporate money behind him, Wall Street money. He's not out there spouting the kinds of conspiracy theories that I so enjoyed in the 2016 campaign. What's up? What do you guys think?
Well, Go ahead, Chris.
I may have a needlessly contrarian take that will lead to you both probably accusing me of being a secret Democrat. But my initial read on this shooter was very much the opposite of yours. Everything that I think I see of him strikes me as a guy, sorry to be reductive, but a weirdo.
Yeah, well, that's definitely true.
Who's not well adapted to society, who's very called to a cause that he lacks the ability to make a meaningful impact on. And I genuinely think that from a certain perspective here, I'm trying to steel man his argument. I'm trying to represent the best possible version of this guy from his vantage point as a person in the United States. There's an argument that the most impactful thing that he could have done to advance the cause of Ukrainian liberation is assassinate Donald Trump. And that is not in any way a call to action, but I as much as I love a good conspiracy, I don't think that on a pattern of 2 shooters, there's enough to point at a deep state conspiracy, which is not to say that it doesn't exist. But when I look at both of these individuals, I think I see 2 people who maybe are indoctrinated, maybe are agitated, maybe are enraged in some way, and pick up one of the millions of readily available rifles floating around the United States. One of the reasons I say this from a gearhead perspective, the rifle that the second shooter used was an SKS, an imported foreign, Soviet-designed rifle, probably with a chrome-lined barrel. These are super popular rifles in swamp environments. They're gator guns. There are hundreds of thousands of these things floating around in Florida right now because they are corrosion resistant. They're that 7.62 caliber that the AK fires. That's why the rifle was originally reported as an AK style rifle. It fires that same cartridge, but in a more traditional, simpler looking long gun format. It's a tremendously capable rifle. That is a military rifle, of which there are hundreds of thousands floating around the United States. His rifle had a defaced serial number. So from a certain argument, this is a guy who I think probably acquired a rifle illegally, decided to set up camp somewhere near where he thought Donald Trump would be to see if he could take a shot and improve the status of whatever his life mission was, which it sounds like was the Ukrainian conflict. And everything that I think I see from his I hate to say tactical choices because my tactical background can be summed up by Call of Duty. I don't see in this person the infrastructure or the nuance that suggests somebody programmed him and directed him to be there.
Well, on the side of rationality, I guess, or just mundaneness, I mean the Secret Service, they did neutralize the threat, or they stopped it from happening, and so it wasn't like a question of gross incompetence. It's just, the guy would have been found sooner if he had more Secret Service, which the Donald should probably have. But in terms of they actually got the job done, and it would have been better to have a bigger sweep of the area. But the other thing I want to say, though, and I don't know, Chris, maybe if you have a thought on this. See, just if I was the Donald, whether or not it's some kind of deep state conspiracy, Mr. Drain the Swamp should be saying that it's a deep state conspiracy because, that's the whole reason why we want the Donald is because we want him to drain the swamp, maybe.
He needs to say Donald Trump, the character, Donald Trump, the professional wrestling character that runs for president, needs to say it's a deep state conspiracy because that's part of his campaign, right? That's part of his
But he doesn't.
Machine.
Yeah.
And I guess my feeling is because, and that kind of makes me think it is a deep state conspiracy because that's why they're shooting at him, because they're scared of what he's gonna go in and do, or at least it's I don't know if ending the war in Ukraine is a good enough reason to shoot the Donald, but it seems like JFK trying to end the war in Vietnam was a good enough reason to shoot JFK. So if he doesn't drain the swamp, ending the war in Ukraine is probably cause enough to try to have him offed.
The critical failure here, I think, to step way back, is anybody who believes what that man says as if he's speaking with literal intent shouldn't.
Yeah. He's P.T. Barnum, meets the WWF or the WWE, as it's been disappointingly remonikered in our own time. Yeah. Well, this is good. I like this because this means that we don't have to pierce our hat on our saber and go charging into the breach of conspiracy theory quite yet, even though there's been a second attempt. And my best guess is that, as I already mentioned, that the presence of the Donald has been fully co-opted by the powers that be in a way that he wasn't in 16 or possibly even 20. I think now the Donald's been fully brought to heel, and I don't think that he wouldn't if he wasn't suitable to the corporate donors. Then that would be one thing. But the fact that he's got all these corporate donations means that he is palatable to corporate donors, and that must mean that he has a defined role within the system that he's playing here, right? It must be the case.
Well, it doesn't really seem like it, just based on... I mean, I guess if that's true, then what it means is that the powers that be just prefer us Americans to be in a hyper-agitated state, which is probably true. So maybe that's just maybe that is the case. Like maybe it is just a kayfabe at the deepest level, and it's just a reason to have us like hyper agitated. And I guess what you could say is maybe they've gotten control of the system here, or they know how to use the Donald as like a chess piece to that end. But on the other hand, though, I just still don't understand why the Donald like no longer says drain the swamp. That part doesn't quite add up to me. Like, or I guess he's just afraid of being shot, I guess is what you'd have to say. And that's kind of how they've brought him to heel.
You think he's lost his mojo, the Donald? He doesn't have the 2016 magic? Do you reckon that he is like, all right, what do I have to say to not get any more bullets flying by my head here?
Oh, well, I think he's now burdened by his own presidential legacy. In 2016, he could run as a political nobody. He could attack anybody on anything at any time because he did not have a position or a record of legislation or government of any kind that anybody could point to give you an idea of who he really is. He's always whoever he says he is in the moment on stage. He's not that man anymore. He's a little bit older. I think his game plan was to campaign against Joe Biden and just knock a delirious old man silly by being a slightly less delirious old man. Because he's unwilling to rely on expertise, outside expertise, he's unprepared for a campaign against Kamala Harris.
See, like during the debate, you watched the debate there. Yeah. So like, you know, they're fact checking the Donald. Like he just had such a lackluster performance. Like because like Kamala called him out for like his bloodbath comment, and like that's just so obviously the context of that statement was talking about like the economic situation via like car manufacturing in China or something. Like it would have been so easy to get in there and say something, and so like yeah, he does have like we know like what the Donald will be if he becomes president, and really, I mean it just is what it is. It's not. I mean, it's not like some fascist dictatorship. He's not gonna start putting people in ovens.
He's not that competent.
You see, it just doesn't really explain the crazily lackluster. Or I guess maybe he's just mailing it in, but that just seems unlikely. I like the crazy debate performance. I guess maybe he's just like old and not that smart, and I guess he's just not that good, is what you'd have to say.
Oh, your man Dave Smith says, you know, the thing about the Donald is he's got great performative instincts, but he knows nothing. He never read a book. That's what Dave Smith's always saying. The man doesn't seem to. That's how the Donald seems to me. It just seems like someone who's not read a book. And yeah, and that really seems like the product we're getting here. That this is just the Donald is useful to the Democrats as a boogeyman because, you know, the more they can point to how bad the Donald is, the less anyone's going to clamor for them to pass any policies that benefit the working and middle classes, which is convenient for the Democrats because they've taken donations, of course, from, you know, from the oligarchy, and now uncomfortably are supposed to be the defenders of the middle and working class. But they can be derelict in that duty so long as they have the boogeyman to trot out to take everyone's attention. So I just think, man, maybe that's just the only role that it's like they've drawn a chalk outline on the sidewalk and the Donald kind of lies down into it, despite the fact that, you know, no one can get a shot at him with a rifle. It still seems like the system has the chessboard has shifted, and like I say, you know, the Donald's now part of the controlled situation, the incandescent debate between the two parties who are indistinguishable on foreign policy and mostly on economic policy too. But as long as the debate within that paradigm is incandescent, no one will think about, you know, alternatives or outside systems or anything like that.
At the risk of derailing this conversation into an anti-religious rant, one of the specific things that I've seen Donald Trump navigate, to your point, is the endorsement and the support of the religious right. He has somehow done just enough performative religious demonstration for enough of those voters to believe that he is a good Christian person, that they're willing to vote for him, despite himself, I believe, harboring other conflicting religious beliefs. Call it what it is.
That's always been a peculiarity of the Republic. Obviously, you have an issue when you've got a society that at least expects the performative imitation of democracy. It's a tough one to pull off massive wealth concentrations within a democracy, right? That's because people are going to use the vote to undo what the economy has done. And that the oligarchy has always used, they need to create this weird patchwork coalition of people to kind of create a 50-50 split on each side of the ticket. You know, it's like when Vegas is setting the betting lines for the NFL, they're choosing a line, not the one that they believe is going to most accurately represent the score of the game, but the one that's going to split the vote one on one side of the line and one on the other, so that Vegas can make their money no matter what. And it's always been interesting to see the Republicans have to be like the party of the corporate party have to court the religious vote also in order to get enough people into their tent, so where you have a balance between the two party duopoly.
They singularly do it with like the abortion issue basically, and so they kind of dance around this issue. And it's funny because like really like taking a stance on abortion like with regard to the federal government is like the opposite of conservatism, right?
Yeah, it's the opposite of less. You know, if the goal is less government, then like abortion bans would seem like the opposite of that. But that's not the explicit Republican Party position, right? The explicit Republican Party position is give it back to the states, let them decide, right?
So, speaking as a libertarian, as a former conservative, that is some sophistry that Republicans flatly believe that people believe. This idea that what the Republican platform is promoting individual liberties by promoting individual sovereignty, by removing federal restrictions on state laws, is just flatly counterproductive to protecting individual liberties. It's a lie that Republicans tell their voters to get them to believe that the GOP at a federal level is managing healthcare in some way that supports their goals.
Well, the abortion issue would seem like a perfect illustration of what you're saying.
It's exactly one of the reasons, one of the bare minimum reasons why we need a unified federal government, because the interpretation of what is lawful and what is appropriate for a person, to the extent to which a government can regulate the body of a person, should not matter what state or town or county you live in, right? That should be a universal American experience. Releasing that control to the 50 states is a way for, in my mind, the legacy secessionists to continue to have their little party below the Mason-Dixon line of having their own version of American democracy while allowing the Union to have their own version somewhere else. That's a hot statement, and it's something that I have come to believe very strongly, and I apologize if I've just brought us back 150 years.
Well, that's not very libertarian of you, Chris. That's your famed reputation on this podcast as the defender of libertarian principles. I thought that regulation of any kind is bad, no matter what. Can you articulate that a little further?
I sure can, and I want to thank you for being named as your token libertarian. It's a duty and an honor and a privilege. And I want to clarify that I am a little L libertarian as opposed to the big L libertarian.
What's the difference?
The difference is I adhere to what I think are libertarian principles conceptually, rather than an adherence to the Libertarian Party.
All right. So you're like, does that mean that like that if your freedom is enhanced by regulation, your individual liberty is enhanced by regulation, then we want regulation.
Yeah,
it's not slavishly. We're not looking to minimize the number of syllables written in the law book. We're looking to maximize personal liberty. Have I got that?
You get it. So a simple way to say it is that regulation at a local level is no more or less intrusive than regulation at a federal level. And the challenge that we will create by allowing some members of our government to act like we are a 200-year-old country that governs by horseback is that we don't need to manage people as if they live in 50 different states and 1,000 different counties and 10,000 different towns. An individual person's rights should be universal within our political body. Deconstructing that regulation at a federal level is a way to end run toward a confusing myriad of state level, county level, town level, even down to the fucking like parish levels, right? There are parts of the country that still integrate their religious systems into their political systems openly, right? People's mayors are their town preachers. It doesn't matter whether that regulation is coming out of a Bible from your neighbor or a federal government. Regulations on our bodies limit civil liberties. It seems easier to me to control one government in Washington than 50 governments across the country.
I guess I'm not 100% following what you're saying. So you're saying that you want like uniform government up and down from like at the local, state, and federal level.
The decision. It's a good challenge. Let me restate the critical things that we need government to regulate, like a person's body sovereignty, should be universal across the country.
Well, why is that? I mean, I think if people in like Alabama want to kneecap themselves with regards to abortion, like I don't care.
So when we say the people, so I want to just deconstruct that. When we say the people, sometimes as American proponents of democracy, we sometimes use the word the people to refer to the outcome of our elected processes. A challenge that we can create for ourselves if we deconstruct all of these regulations down to local levels is we will lose the ability to recognize when they are disproportionately impacting other members of our society. And to be very blunt, when we break this stuff down to the state local level, young women will be compelled to grow up in homes that are run by the people that create the regulations that they then have to live under. And I want to pause for dramatic effect there, because if that sounds like a Taliban kind of environment, that's exactly what I'm driving at. This idea of, to sum this up, as a libertarian, I've come to believe that this argument for deregulating federal government as a way of bringing decisions back to the states is simply a back-asswards way of saying to somebody, I'm going to live the life that I live, and I'm going to force people around me to live in the way that we choose here in my little pond, and you somewhere else can go live your own way that you choose.
Well,
that is quintessentially American. I can hear what you're probably going to jam me up for.
Yeah, well, it sounds. I mean, you're going to have customs. I mean, it'd be cool, but I mean, America is like a big place, and I guess I don't see. It seems untenable to try to have the same laws and regulations. I mean, the whole reason why government kind of like power structures evolve for reasons around certain things, like the same way that like, a port is going to exist maybe at the confluence of some rivers. Like there's a reason why like Baton Rouge or whatever, that the big place in Louisiana is at the mouth of the Mississippi, because that's like an important place. And government structures are sort of similar, like power evolves around structures that are for a reason. And so I guess I don't know. I don't know why we need to have uniform law. I guess other than that, it would be cool. Why we'd want that?
Well, maybe a way to defend it. There are like 300 million of us living in the United States, right? We each have our own worldviews, our own moralities, our own things that we think are right or wrong. We each think that we are good examples of what it means to be an American doing the right thing. Everybody in the country lives their lives, I think, generally trying to live their lives as best they can. What happens in a country this large is people's disagreements over what it means to live a good life can obviously come into conflict. And the challenge that we will create by failing to protect people's individual sovereignty, their freedoms and rights to make decisions over their own bodies, if we fail to protect that nationally as a society, we can create environments or pockets of our society where individual rights are grossly violated and not respected.
Well, with regards to like abortion, right? You're either for women's rights or you're for killing babies. And so like, there's not just like I mean, you're not, to say you're really like, an abortion ban is like as a violation of people's rights. Well, yes, but you are also for saving babies, though. And so, I mean, I guess ideally you'd come up with like a good law where maybe in the first trimester it's legal, and then like increasingly it's difficult to get an abortion or something.
Yeah, that's a hard process, right?
But,
there's a lot of inputs.
But the Europeans solved this long ago, that each country has a different number of days past the conception date that you're allowed to get an abortion, and some, but it's always like 60 days or something like that. So maybe in some of these countries the later terms abortions are banned, but the earlier term, and that seems to match. We could all sort of agree on a number of days, whenever it is, between 60 and 90. We're like, all right, we're going to just put a cutoff because things do get a little gruesome. Like, I don't think anyone shares the same ethical intuition about the abortion of a fetus, at 4 weeks versus 9 months. Obviously, most of us are going to have a similar ethical intuition after 6 weeks, let's say. And most of us are going to have a different ethical intuition at 8 months. That's what makes this football so endlessly appealing to the oligarchy, because you can go round and round forever without, it's like a spectrum. When does red become orange when you're looking at the rainbow, and when does orange become yellow? Well, that's going to kind of be in the eye of the beholder. That just makes this ripe fruit for the duopoly to keep kicking around like a football.
An additional criticism I'd levy is that the moral stance of defending unborn babies that some pro-life advocates take is a tremendously cheap way to take a moral stance in an argument. By nature, unborn fetuses aren't there to advocate for their needs. So when we're debating and comparing about, when we're weighing the balance between the right of that fetus to be alive versus the right of a real human woman with a voice and a mind and a personality and who can articulate their needs, that is an impossible situation for I think any normal person to feel like, let me step back on that statement. I don't feel competent making that judgment on behalf of an unborn mythical baby or a real human woman standing in front of me. And it blows my mind how much confidence people have in their own hubris to make that decision on others' behalf.
Well, would you say the same of a child that was 2 to 3 weeks post-birth? Like, that child's not totally incapable of defending themselves with rhetoric, but yet, now that the child's been delivered, now it would seem like really there's just no possible argument for, any inconvenient children that are a couple weeks old. You can't just dispose of them, right? So once the child's delivered and fully viable, like, ethical intuitions change fast. It's like, I guess I would feel comfortable, at least from birth onward, saying we can't have a rash of baby killings. But yeah, birth is just such a natural. It's a clear moment when orange really becomes yellow. And so the question is just how many weeks before birth do we want to extend that, if any at all? And that's a somewhat interesting discussion, but not really worthy of the airtime it gets. Well, we go round and round in that cul-de-sac instead of discussing the collapsing middle class or the...
It's an important navel-gazing conversation. It seems important, and it's a nice thing to get angry about because the three of us here, the three of us dudes here in this room, we are never going to have that decision thrust upon ourselves about whether we're going to get an abortion. So I hear what you're saying. It's an easy thing to get enraged about, but not a productive thing to invest so much effort into deliberating.
Yeah, we should just have a societal consensus like Europeans have, where we figure, all right, month 8 or month 8.5, or it doesn't really even matter where we all, if we average together everyone's ethical intuition, I'm sure we can come up with a reasonable number and move on from the abortion thing and never discuss it again. But that would be a disaster for the political oligarchy. So that's why we'll just never... I always like to compare it to, sending in the aged quarterback one more time for the sweet souvenir, send him back into, to try to, maybe absorb, like our own Patriots quarterback tried to absorb some punishment from a faulty offensive line. But, I just see it as a total distraction, a wedge issue.
A good wedge issue is the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, it'll stop people from going down to occupying Wall Street and saying we are the 99%, all the 1%. What's up?
I do want to acknowledge that as much as I agree that it feels like a wedge issue, that's a convenient thing for me to say as a man. I fully recognize that you maybe have a woman listener or two in your audience base who may disagree with that, and I didn't want to let it go unaired that's an experience that I don't have, so I recognize I have some gaps on.
Well, I would say, I'm just going to say it is a wedge issue because it's this political football that's been being kicked around for as long as America has been a thing, or at least the past 80 years or so. And so now maybe we're not in the best position to speak on what necessarily the answer should be, but I'm comfortable calling it a wedge issue.
Yeah, look to the hypothetical young lady you just mentioned. I would just say that if you think that if that's going to motivate you to pull the lever for the Democrats, you need to recall that Barack Obama ran on abortion in 2008, ran on codifying Roe v. Wade into law, matriculated into the presidency with both houses of Congress, also Democratic majorities, and did nothing whatsoever to codify Roe v. Wade into law because he's, his pockets are lined by the big banks, and this is all a fugazi to keep us not talking about the big banks. So there's no, if you think that pulling the lever for Kamala Harris is going to help you secure abortion rights, well, if abortion is really important to you, if to you it's not a wedge issue, just realize the Democrats have a long history of Lucy holding the football on this, and so you just need to keep that in mind. Your newspapers and your CNN will not report on the intransigence of President Obama in 2008 because they want to keep you invested in the cul-de-sac and not thinking about any other issues besides abortion. So,
if memory serves, Bill Clinton partly campaigned on making abortions safe, legal, and rare.
Yeah.
Very famous Democrat platform in the 90s.
I remember that.
Look where it got us. Well, to an extent, I want to walk that back. Abortion access has improved, and probably why this is such a hot wedge issue is because some people feel that it is slid back or retracted, right? That certainly in many parts of the country, someone's access to healthcare, reproductive healthcare, is less than it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago.
Well, to go to the kayfabe conspiracy theory, in that like the Donald, the establishment or the powers that be have the Donald where they want him. Like the overturning of Roe v. Wade really crystallizes like the Donald is like this boogeyman, right? And it'll just be interesting. I guess like Bill Clinton's position is like a reasonable one, right? Is that what you were saying? And,
it's one that I align with. I suppose you could say that, yes.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty much how we all feel, is that there should be access to abortion, but you don't want tons of aborted babies.
Bingo.
Yeah, and so the overturning of Roe v. Wade really like makes the Donald seem like a boogeyman, and so that is a good move for the powers that be, right?
Especially because he's so dumb that he, pardon my language, he put it in those words. He campaigned saying, I'm going to overturn Roe v. Wade. And then when it happened, he got up on a camera and he said, I did it. I overturned Roe v. Wade. He took credit for it.
Yeah, well, and now he's trying to like walk back. I mean, there was some talk of like a federal abortion ban, or at least I think J.D. Vance was making some noise in support of an abortion ban. And now like the rest of the Republican Party is trying to not talk about abortion so much because they're trying to win this election.
You have to get the evangelists into your tent as a Republican candidate. Right? You have to get the evangelists on your side, but not simultaneously alienate the rest of the electorate. So it's a fine line to be walking.
So to that end, is now a good time to talk about Chase Oliver?
Let's do it.
I have the perfect shoehorn way to get him into this conversation about the kayfabe.
Yeah, that's the Libertarian Party frontrunner, right?
Chase Oliver, to back you up, he's now the Libertarian candidate for president. You can Google him if you want to know his party platforms. I think we're gonna talk about a couple dimensions of him. But one of the things that I want to put in your two brains, and by extension all the people across the world who listen, is that in my opinion the only reason anybody is talking about Chase Oliver is because he was a spoiler candidate that disrupted a really contentious Democrat and Republican election in Georgia. You remember the runoff? I'm now blanking on their names. I had written them down and I lost my piece of paper. A couple of years ago, there was a major senatorial runoff in Georgia that happened because a third party candidate won 2% of the vote in Georgia.
Warnock, and I can't remember the name of the other person.
And,
Herschel Walker.
Oh,
the football guy. That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So Warnock and Walker, your listeners now know how horribly unprepared I was for this, but in my mind, the reason we're talking about Chase Oliver is Chase Oliver happened to be the Libertarian candidate for that senatorial race and won 2% of the vote, enough to trigger a runoff between these two, frankly, title fighters. The Libertarian Party saw the potential for this guy coming from a small runoff campaign in Georgia to be a larger scale spoiler candidate. And in good fashion with what the Libertarian Party does when they pick candidates, we picked this guy because he was topical, because he was a big thumb in the eye of the two major parties, and because he was willing to read the room of what libertarians wanted and spouted back all of the popular libertarian left positions that young libertarian voters have been desperate for.
Such as, can you give us a few examples of said lefty positions? My impression of Oliver is that he's like a woke version of libertarian.
Yeah, you could call him that. So he's claiming to be. There's this movement within little L libertarianism of a socially progressive left, whatever, communist libertarian. There's a whole bunch of these little tents. Libertarianism is a big place. First, who he is, he's a gay man, and I don't mean that with any sort of value judgment. That's complicated his positions, or the way he expresses his positions on gender equality and transition care. So one of the things that he has spent some energy into delivering a nuanced perspective on that I actually align with is his stance on both surgical and hormone replacement therapies.
For minors or for regular people?
For regular people. Yeah. So part of his libertarian mindset is he doesn't want federal government funding any of these things because he doesn't want federal government funding any healthcare, but he specifically wants to prohibit surgical interventions on people that are younger than 18, which is, in my mind, not an not an unreasonable thing for Chris Bleep to believe, but as a gay man running for a libertarian ticket, that's a delicate position for him to have articulated. And in one sense, I admire and I applaud what he's done there, because he's represented a group of people that we could say topically are in need of representation, and he's done that well. Separately, he's also a Christian dominionist, and he wants to dismantle the Department of Education. He's specifically proposed, this is why I cannot get behind this person. He's proposed dismantling the Department of Education. And rather than, in his proposal, he has an explicit statement that rather than taking that funding and releasing it to the states, he wants to take all the funding that goes into federal Department of Ed and hand it back to the taxpayers.
And you would rather, and that's a big sticking point for you?
It is, because it represents to me a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be a libertarian. I think libertarianism, little L libertarianism, requires people to be reasonably well educated and able to understand and articulate positions. So when I see a libertarian working against public education or working against the funding of public education, I get nervous. So I've done some digging into his background and his politics, and it seems to be driven purely by this Christian evangelical belief that education is a sacred duty of the parents, and he wants nobody in government responsible for educating children, coming from the state of Georgia.
So
this is unconscionable to me.
You want to maintain the federal Department of Education, or do you want to disband it and give that power back to the states?
I don't have a strong proposal. So on this, I recognize I'm a little bit of a lame duck, but I'm also not a candidate for president. It seems counterintuitive to me to dismantle the regulatory body, but to take this big pile of cash and then just give it away to people. And what it screams to me as a person who doesn't see the value in education, wants to dismantle national education as a way to indoctrinate people into a Christian worldview, and is campaigning to be able to do that by is promising to be able to give people a bit of a cash kickback as he does that. Rather than take that money and put it somewhere to use, he's just going to put it back in people's pockets if they vote for him.
Well, it seems like, based on what you were saying earlier, you should want to keep the Department of Education because you want to have some kind of similar standard across the country or something.
Yeah, I do, and that's a complicated set of ideals, and that could be a whole another podcast. But there are people who are better at education. Education is not a thing that happens by accident. There are systems and processes and procedures. There is human science to how education happens that is only visible at organizations at scale. That say homeschooling or small local community schooling can't match, because they draw teachers from their local community. They draw their knowledge base. They draw the assets and skills and all the curriculum design that their local social unit can provide, either their parish or their town or their county. So if you live in Portland, Maine, or Boston, Massachusetts, that's great. If you live in Podunk, Georgia, that's rough. And that's where I see where the Department of Education can be having a major impact in making the United States a better place, is by ensuring that there are consistent standards in education for every child in America, to know that everybody's getting math, science, maybe some music, maybe art. I don't know. Right there, there's a lot of smarter people out there than myself who can advocate for these things. But I think the play for a presidential candidate to build their campaign around dismantling and defunding public education in America now is both insane and obviously disruptive. Like, it will obviously make America a worse place. And the only reason we're even entertaining it is because somebody recognized that this guy was the spoiler that broke up a Democrat-Republican election, and they decided to make him a candidate because that would make him famous. That's it.
Now, and so you're worried about, Christian schooling for young children or whatever, that I guess is what this guy is trying to get to set up. And so I guess so they're going to teach that maybe the world was created in 6 days, but he's also, well, obviously he's a gay man, and so he's not going to say that, buggery damns you to hell.
As written in Leviticus, yeah. Well, it doesn't say it damns you to hell. It's just that it's expressly forbidden.
Well, you shan't be stoned to death for committing such acts.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot in the Old Testament about hell. It's really a New Testament thing, is my understanding. But I take your point. I'm just making a joke there. Like, it does seem like it's hard to imagine a gay man endorsing the Christian faith, or at least a literal interpretation of the Christian faith.
Well, it's funny, I guess. So I guess people won't believe in evolution, but it will be a very pride friendly regime.
Well, Chris, I do think that your argument is compelling, and I agree with it. I just don't see it as a libertarian argument. To me, whenever you talk to libertarians, this is my experience. It's like someone declares themselves a libertarian. You're like, I can see that logic because we have just so like being a libertarian is going to give you the right answer on our foreign policy 99% of the time because the current regime is so badly corrupt and so involved in foreign wars. I mean, that just being a libertarian is just an easy way to say we don't mind paying for civil defense, but that's the extent of the military. That should be the scope of our military. But it just seems like every time when you engage with someone who's identifies as a libertarian, it's easy to think of, oh, well, what about this specific instance where we give up a little bit of freedom but get massive benefits as a result? Like, for example, the convention of driving only on the right side of the road. Now, I may feel compelled to drive on the left side of the road, but by allowing my activity to be restricted and being like, yeah, it's probably for the best that there's cops out there writing tickets and pulling people over that drive in the wrong lane. That's just, you can see a huge amount of public safety comes from the surrendering of our right to drive on the wrong side of the road. And the libertarian will always have some argument about why we need to have closed borders, for example, or why we need to have militarily enforced borders, or in this instance, a massive apparatus of public education coming from the highest levels. Now, I agree with what you said, but I just don't see it. I just don't see how you can fit that into a libertarian framework.
Well, let me take a shot at this.
Yeah.
50 states. So think about the body of traffic law. You're in Maine. I drove up here from Massachusetts. I had to drive through New Hampshire to get here. So as a driver, as an operator of a motor vehicle, having surrendered those privileges and those freedoms, I had to be aware of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine motor vehicle laws. That doesn't sound like a big deal. Everybody does that all the time. But to answer your question, the way to get to the bare minimum level of government regulation is to simplify our legal codes. And one of the ways that we can do that in America in 2024 is letting go of the idea that the 50 states, the arbitrary borders that create the 50 states matter. That's an intrinsically libertarian principle, that borders are made up. They're arbitrary. They're lines on a map that people drew. The state borders, the 50 state borders within our country are as arbitrary as the national borders themselves. The way to get the least amount of regulation is not to make everybody responsible for all the regulation everywhere, but is to make one clear system of traffic rules that applies everywhere in the country.
Well, okay, so that would make sense. But I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about power structures, but the borders aren't arbitrary. And like these states have developed where they have for a reason is the thing.
Yeah, libertarians are often full of shit.
Okay.
So borders aren't arbitrary, but that's a thing libertarians say when we want to argue against regulations.
Well, I sort of to what Nate's saying here. I mean, there's like being a libertarian, and then there's just like arguing, like there's like, well, we should just have like the best policies, which, minimal government is a good idea, but we should just kind of, I mean, really what we're arguing for is just having the best policies. And so does it mean anything to be a libertarian or?
I think I maybe to come at it this way, a failing of libertarians that I recognize, that I think you guys see, is that libertarians don't live the values that they claim often. So one of the things that I think is important about libertarianism is I have this belief that we can create a single standard set of minimal regulations that work, and therefore it's our obligation to try to do that. There are many libertarians who take libertarianism, they hear that euphemism, your rights end where my nose begins or whatever, and they take that to mean I'm going to take my toys and go live in Guilford and let the bears eat my trash. Not to be too regional. And that's where I think uneducated and ignorant people land on libertarianism, because they don't have the language or the desire to really articulate or form or create or defend political beliefs. They want to live alone and live a life unimpacted by others, which I totally understand. And the ideology they find to do that is libertarianism, because it gives them a convenient way to tell everybody to fuck off.
Well, it sounds, incompatible with a country with like millions and millions of people. But I guess to some extent, like what it might mean to be libertarian, like I don't really understand all of Dave Smith's deeper libertarian views, but he talks about, I guess he thinks that the government shouldn't have any rights that a regular person doesn't. And therefore, I guess they're not allowed to imprison you, which it's the government not having some kind of authority to administer consequences. I mean, obviously, I can see why there's problems with letting the government do that, but to not have the government have like some kind of coercive force also seems problematic. How do you feel about? Do you have any thought on that as a libertarian, or do you want a government that can imprison people and possibly administer the death penalty?
I have many thoughts. I'd start by saying I stand against the death penalty, so I consider myself pro-life. Ha. But I think there's no point in a government that doesn't have power. So I think one of the legitimate uses for government is the monopolization of force. Absent government, if we're living in caveman times, the only way for us to regulate our agreements and our relationships with each other is to convince each other or to beat the shit out of each other until the stronger one wins. And what I see as the evolution of our governments over the millennia and centuries have been a consolidation of that ability to use power and violence and force to enforce agreements. And I think it's a better state to have that power invested with a third party that's regulated by a democratic government than it is to invest that power in each of us individually.
This is the non-aggression principle, eh? Like by awarding a monopoly on violence to the state, you decrease the total volume of violence substantially. This is the argument?
Yeah, I like how you said that. That's a euphemism I was going to avoid saying because people hate when libertarians say it, but I feel heard.
Okay, all right, good.
Yeah, it's incumbent on libertarians, of people who choose to be, who want to live free and independent, to also be good citizens and mindful of the world around them, and to contribute to the world. I also am shocked when I hear libertarians not get angry about environmental issues or climate change. I know a lot of libertarians who are outdoorsmen, who are hunters, who are fishermen, who live their lives outdoors and do not give a shit about environmental controls to create a world that their children can enjoy the way that they are. And it blows my mind that somebody can say they're a libertarian and believes in non-aggression while they're watching the world melt.
You used a term a few minutes ago, Chris, the bare minimum regulation, something like that. The idea that there could, libertarianism to me just means that whenever the question is, should we have a regulation or not have one, it presupposes that it's better not to have a regulation than to have one. Now, you could say, well, by default, we want the fewest number of regulations possible, but we are going to embrace the ones that deliver value that outweigh the loss of our personal liberty. Well, that's great, but that's not a libertarian position. Libertarian is like, we want less regulations, and whenever the question comes up, we always want to opine in the direction of less regulations. But if there is such thing as the bare minimum, then that's all well and good to say we value fewer regulations. We got to recognize that there's another value above that when we talk about bare minimum. And so if libertarianism is not your top level value, then does that, can you still count yourself as a libertarian?
I suppose in my mind, I think of libertarianism my definition of libertarianism isn't about government regulation at all. It's about maximizing individual liberties. I think one of the ways that America can get there is to simplify our legal codes, yes, but primarily the purpose of a libertarian government, if we were to create one, that sounds like a sci-fi dystopian future, but the purpose of a libertarian government would be to create protections for individual civil liberties in whatever way happens. And that's why I think you read a lot of disagreement among libertarians. People who come at it from either a philosophical or social perspective often feel very differently than people who come at it from an economic standpoint.
Yeah. That's I come from the economic standpoint, and so
it's almost a shame that we're trying to call ourselves the same thing, because as much as we might agree on some policies, the way libertarians and the Green Party often align on some policies, the motivations are very different. The drivers and the way that we think about ourselves and why we believe what we do is very different within the Libertarian Party. It's unfortunate to see. I think I'm seeing the party beginning to break up.
I think there may be a snake in the libertarian basket. That is to say, I think that this libertarian philosophy, it makes intuitive sense, and I think all of us would agree. Yeah, if we're not gaining anything from regulation, we ought to strike it off the books. And if we're not gaining a lot from a regulation, we ought to strike it off the books. And we're dealing with a bloated and corrupt state, and so a libertarian opinion 99 times out of 100 is going to give you the right answer on a question. But I think that libertarian philosophy has been seeded or supported by corporate interests that wish to, remove regulations on themselves, first of all. And this takes the form of the Austrian School of Economics, or the economics most frequently cited by libertarians. And the idea here is that we want to let business flourish in this market when we want a minimum amount of state intervention in the market. And but to me, the market that just ignores the fact that the market is entirely projected by a state through currency issuance. So if you don't have a unit of account that you can translate any good or service into, then you have no market. And so the market is entirely a function of currency production and distribution, something we have granted a monopoly to the banks on. And so I think that, finance capital loves libertarianism in the sense that the fact that they supply our nation with currency, that we have granted them a monopoly. That's what a central bank is it's convenient for them because libertarianism can run cover for finance capital. And then on the industrial capital side, those guys hate regulations. They want to ship poison food and and products that are damaging, and they can't make money when they have to comply. They have to hire people to comply with these regulations. And so I think that that some of the political viability of libertarianism comes from the fact that these two forces, finance capital on the one end and industrial capital on the other, see a lot of convenience in there. And but I think that I think that we've got a bit of a Trojan horse here with regard to libertarianism on that front, and that I always think of the old legend of the Chinese emperor who decreed that all wagon axles would be of a fixed length throughout the empire, and that way the ruts and the roads would be in the same places. It would make commerce a lot smoother. Well, that's an anti-libertarian policy. It's like a really oppressive regulation, but you just gain so much from it that I think that the libertarian intuition in that specific instance is not the correct one. It's a basic or a bare minimum, as you were saying. So, yeah, I think that that's just I just think libertarianism it's like important because, like I say, it's right 99% of the time in our current situation. But at bedrock, I think that there's other values that virtually every libertarian has that there will retreat from libertarianism when those values come up in conversation. Does that make sense? I hope I articulated that comprehensively.
Yeah, it's something that I experienced myself. There's a lot of platforms that are associated with libertarianism, and there's a part of me that feels obligated to defend all of them because I understand them. And if somebody is like open to just, even if I don't believe it, if someone's open to a libertarian, a bit of libertarian propaganda, I'll say it. But there are things under the libertarian tent that I don't really believe as strongly as any other, and I am perfectly willing to backpedal on, or quietly backpedal on if that's more convenient.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've already identified as a small L libertarian, which means I guess the point's already been conceded. But the last time we had you on, Chris, we agreed that Nate and I were closet libertarians and that you were a closet Marxist. I think maybe we haven't discussed Marxism, but we I think sort of like landing. I don't. It doesn't sound like we really disagree about anything. So we really need to get like a big L libertarian in here at some point to spar with.
Yeah, you got to get one of those party guys, because that's the libertarian political engine seems like it's like a JV show for the Democratic and Republican parties. It's a political party that's adopted a political philosophy as a way to generate its existence.
It's like, of course, going to be the answer, because like obviously like what you want is what really matters at the end of the day is good policy, right? It's what anyone would think, right? So there's just no way that like libertarianism is the most important ideal, right, compared to good policy. So we don't
really want minimal regulation. We want quality regulation, right? It's not all regulation is bad. It's that there's a spectrum of quality to regulation. We want to cherry pick the good stuff and get rid of all that bad stuff.
And the mindset, the methodology of thinking, the bare minimum intervention, because laws are so hard to unwind and delegislate once they're created. So this is why libertarians seem so disruptive in legislative processes, because they hear I'll defend it. Everything that gets codified into law becomes law forever, unless somebody takes the time to make new law. Continue to add new and complex laws to our already existing body of laws is exactly the kind of thing that the Ron Pauls of the world should be stamping their feet and screeching about. And it makes us sound sometimes unrealistic or naive when we say, well, we can't pass any laws because we've got reams and reams and reams of laws already on the books. What more harm could this one bill do?
That's poisonous thinking right there. You just end up with way too much crap on the books. Well, I was disappointed in the nomination of Chase Oliver. I would have considered a libertarian candidate. You imagine if Dave Smith was running, it'd be like a no-brainer to pull a lever for Dave Smith. My main man, RFK, has folded his tent, and I was really frustrated with RFK for his position on Gaza and Israel. Like half of there was a poll earlier in like June or May, and like half of Joe Biden voters thought that what was happening in Gaza was a genocide. And it's like RFK, he could have like totally. I mean, he could have been relevant. He could have been a major candidate in this race if he would have just come out against what's happening. It would have been our only policy option for not continued intervention, or not continuing to fund massive ongoing military operation in Gaza. So I would have, like, if the Libertarians had a better candidate, I certainly would have considered them for the reasons you've articulated.
Well, RFK, I think I said it before on the podcast, but RFK said on, Shane Gillis's podcast that Netanyahu does prop up Hamas as a way of preventing the two-state solution, which is about all you can hope for. But he should have said that a lot more. Yeah,
that right there, I think, is I remember during the COVID era, I would go on my phone and try to Google mask efficacy or vaccine efficacy, and I had trouble finding them on Google. Like, you would have to go to DuckDuckGo back then, to try to find anything any sort of dissension from the consensus that was being propagated by the mainstream media. But when it comes to Bibi Netanyahu and propping up Hamas, you can just type that right into Google, and Israeli newspapers will come up just admitting it. The man's
Israeli Times.
Yeah.
I heard an interview on NPR. Our Secretary of State Blinken.
Yeah, Anthony
Blinken. Man, I am butchering my words today, even though I've written all this shit down. He was recently caught off the cuff describing negotiations with Netanyahu. His statement was simply that the resources are there. It's a question of political will. So when talking about the ceasefire in Gaza, our Secretary of State is walking out of the room thinking it is a question only of political will, which is horrifying because it's American bombs killing Palestinian kids every day.
Ugh.
I am. There's a scene in these Marvel movies. There's a couple of these characters whose origin story is their family being bombed to death by Stark Industries weapons, and so they grow up hating Iron Man. And it was such like a poignant scene for America in the early 2010s. It's literally happening right now in Gaza, and we're waiting on Benjamin Netanyahu to be the one to be the adult in the room and finally calm down and agree to a ceasefire. It's insane.
It's really bizarre. It reveals something disturbing about the structure of international politics and in the way that power works. It's like really disturbing. And so now the only way that I know of to Chase Oliver's position, I have to. Do you know what his position on Gaza is? I don't know.
Broadly, as you can imagine, as libertarian, he's non-intervention. He wants to end all U.S. foreign military involvement. To the point of even scaling back foreign military presence. He wants to sort of retract our military to the home island, if you will.
Well, I mean, I think the logical solution is, I mean, I would agree with that position, and I think if you think that Israel is like doing God's work over there, well, you should just send your own money over to them and support it, and not spend my tax dollars on that madness.
The Israeli Defense Force is happy to accept volunteers. So if anybody feels strongly about it, you can go do your training and go to work.
All right. Well, you want to say something on politics? Because we should talk about Hebron Academy.
Well, I just one last item is a array of choices for presidential candidate. If you want to vote against foreign military intervention, basically it was Jill Stein and Chase Oliver are your only choices. Now, Chris, I understand that you have decided that you would pull the lever that you in your current there's a month to go to the election, so you're feeling more inclined to pull as a libertarian. Feeling more inclined to pull the lever for Stein than Chase Oliver. I wonder if you could articulate your reasoning, because that's interesting.
Well, you, not to be too cute, but you two articulated my reasoning in your pod last week. Quite simply, on a position-by-position analysis of the four major candidates, Jill Stein is more aligned with my values than the other three.
So what has she got there? Like Israel and what else?
Well, so she's broadly her primary causes are obviously like her foreign policy talk and her environmental causes, right? So environmental controls, climate change management are all things that I've just criticized the Libertarian Party for. They're idiots for not thinking about the state of the world as we progress. I've also heard her comment on education, which obviously you care about, and or obviously I care about. She's also talked a little about recidivism and changing our criminal justice system to reduce the number of repeat offenders. And to his credit, Chase Oliver has done the same thing. He's been quite critical of he's had a couple of speeches where he's talked specifically about how high our prison population is compared to other less nice places to live in the world. So on these, there are a lot of alignment. I am uncomfortable not choosing the Libertarian candidate because I have for many elections, but it's primarily his goals of dismantling our public education system and his, the Christian yoke he wears around his neck to win him votes.
So the two E's, environmentalism, education, are why you feel moved away from the Libertarian nominee into the Green Party.
And that feels like a weird thing for a Libertarian to say, because this is what a lot of New Hampshire Libertarians will say government shouldn't be doing. But honestly, I live in a state where these things are part of our public systems. We have Massachusetts, some of the best public education in the world. We have some of the best environmental controls, public park systems in the country. You could argue it's a nice place to live, and the tax spend is small. So as a Libertarian who gets to choose where I live for the time being, Massachusetts is a really nice place to live.
Oppressive regime in terms of firearms, though, eh?
Well, candidly, if you are white and you don't draw the attention of police, it'll never be an issue.
Yeah, that's the sad truth. Though.
I just want to ask you about environmentalism real quick here, as long as we got you.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm concerned that global warming is kind of a hoax, and because like the temperature is going to fluctuate. It's they did used to say it was going to be global cooling, and then it's not like the price of like beachfront property in like Miami or out in California or whatever is like going down, right? I mean, it seems like, and people like, oh, it's like hot out today, it's global warming, and it seems like made up. Also like weather control is like they've been doing cloud seeding since like the 1940s, and they make it rain in Dubai like once a week. And so, are you concerned that global warming is that when you talk about environmentalism, are we talking about global warming? And of course, I don't think polluting is good, but I just am concerned that it's like this kind of made up issue, though.
So, environmentalism is probably the bigger bucket. Global warming is a subset of it, and you could probably. I think climate scientists are doing now to avoid being pinned against the wall is they're calling it climate change or anthropogenic climate change, human-driven climate change. I think for what we know about how humans are changing the face of the planet, we are obviously having an ecological impact. We are in the middle of a catastrophic extinction event of all sorts of wild species of all order of life. And a couple of the reasons that are happening is small changes in global temperatures are shifting where organisms can live. Some of those things are being caused by other human activities, human migration of invasive species, for example. So it's a big issue. There is a lot involved. Where I think libertarians fail to recognize their aggression is that when we consume natural resources or when we use the natural world, we are having an impact. We are breathing air every day. We are shitting out wastes every day. We are living vibrant people that are consuming bits in an ecosystem. One of the unique things that Americans don't see is how much of our climate impact happens away from us. Right? We buy food in a grocery store. We buy our electronics in an Apple store. So much of either the pollution or the consumption or the natural resource degradation, whatever. So much of the environmental impact of our modern American existence is outsourced to other parts of the world. We don't see it anymore. So it becomes a thing that Americans don't think about. We think of environmentalism as cleaning up penguins and oil spills and climate change, but there are many dimensions to this. And I hear Jill Stein advocating for mindfulness on those issues in ways that the other three parties aren't. Maybe this is me having recently turned 40. I've picked up native gardening as a hobby. So I've spent the summer like swapping out plants and doing a lot of gardening. So I'm right into the mindset of a honeybee and all the plants they need to pollinate. So I recognize that I'm hyper focused on this now, but environmentalism and environmental awareness, I think, extends much more beyond climate change and into resource utilization. I heard again on NPR the Aral Sea is more or less completely gone. Over the last 20 years, local governments have been diverting water that fed the Aral Sea for various agricultural reasons.
Now, where is the Aral Sea? In Europe?
Europe. It's somewhere in the Ukrainian region. Again,
Yeah, it's like in the Caucasus. It's going
Yeah,
to be Georgia. I think it's Georgia. It could be Azerbaijan. I think it's Georgia.
I remember there was an interview with a Ukrainian. There was a dimension of it. There was a Ukrainian like water treatment organization that was diverting water from a river that fed the Aral Sea. So the point being that ocean that once supported bustling either commerce or fishing or habitat has been reduced to about a tenth of its surface area, which is completely gutted local fishing economies there. The wildlife that once filled that sea and supported human habitation is gone.
There is a broad trend of that happening even prior to the Industrial Revolution. I think now North Africa and the Carthaginians became the breadbasket and fed Rome after the Punic Wars. But now you wouldn't be growing anything in like Tunisia. It's like desert with sand dunes. So there's broader trends going on that are out of our control, but I can't help but and I think there's something deeply wrong with science. You can pull up from 1978 a presentation voiced by the venerable Leonard Nimoy about how we're hurtling towards a global cooling event and the glaciers are going to return. And now scientists are sounding the opposite alarm bell. And I think that the horror of peer review and the damaged institution of science is to where if you wanted to publish a paper that showed that climate change wasn't as severe as previously indicated, that paper would just not get published. Like the institutions they're only looking to burnish their own importance by sounding as extreme an alarm on climate change as they can. But I can't help but feel that the insane amount of pollution, I think now maybe of the massive amount of plastic, swirling in a vortex in the Pacific Ocean, so I can't, even though I am distrustful of the ideology of science, and I consider it to be our religion today, our priesthood, it still cannot be good to do all the polluting that we're doing, and we're doing a lot of it.
It seems commonsensically true that humans are having an impact on the planet in a way that we have never had before when we look at other either geological ages or ages of humanity. And we don't know yet how that really complex weather system will react. We've got some people who are making predictions, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. It seems within human capability at some point to understand the climate systems enough to be able to manage them. But climate is a piece of it, right? There's only so much iron on the planet, right? We're running out of helium, right? All the rare earth minerals that make our cell phones work, most of those come out of mines in China that teenagers die building. It's so environmentalism and conservation of natural resources is partly climate related and partly just being a good steward of your land. A thing I've been saying to my family is I'm trying to be a good steward for my little half acre.
All right. Well, in the time we got left here, we got to have our struggle session about our high schooling experience, right?
All right.
Yes. Okay. So the situation is thus, dear listeners, the three voices you've been hearing for the last hour, we all went to the same public high school, and private high school. And when you think of our high school, you'd ought to picture the 1989 film Dead Poet Society. And we had the
less paddling, though.
Less paddling, unfortunately. Yeah. We had the brick clock tower with the ivy creeping up the side. We had the quad. It was very much a prep school experience in the glorious transcendental tradition of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. But going to that school as day students, as we were, our parents sent us to the school daily. It was a boarding school, so we were one of. Chris, you and I were in the same class. Brian, you were 4 years behind us. So when we were senior, you were eighth grade, right? We were never
right.
Yeah. So you came through matriculated 4 years after us. And my considered contention here, and Chris, you shall be the tiebreaker because I think you'll agree with me. My considered contention here. I noticed my motivational structure maxes out at 24 hours in my adult life. Like if I don't have some kind of a dopamine hit within a 24-hour period, life gets really difficult for me. I have trouble deploying a multi-day plan. So I have to think in terms of 24-hour cycles. And I think that the fact that we were overscheduled in our private school upbringing, I blame it on that. I blame the fact that I can't seem to extend my I can't implement a plan that's longer than 24 hours in duration. And I think that when you're a young kid, you're supposed to develop a motivational structure. But if you're marched from school to sport, we were required to do an after-school activity in our upbringing, and then we also had lengthy commutes. And I think Chris, yours may have been the longest of the three of us. Not really sure, but let's say it took half hour to get to something like that. Like my wake up time, all through middle school and high school is 5:45 a.m. And I found that once we would get home, to our home 6:30 or something, the late bus would drop us off after our after school activities. The professors did not coordinate with each other in terms of the workload they were giving us, and so each professor thought of themselves as the only class we were taking. So you'd have 5 or 6 classes, and you might have an hour or 2 of homework from each of those classes in a given evening. Let's say 1 hour. Let's say we're taking 5 classes, and you get 1 hour of homework from each class. Well, if you get home at 6:30 at night and you wake up at 5:45 p.m., well, that is only 11 hours to complete all of your homework and get 8 hours of sleep, and and that leaves no time for relaxing or doing anything but just having one activity after another. And then the weekends we'd have Saturday classes, or we would drive out to Tilton Academy in New Hampshire for a hockey game or whatever. And then our parents, Brian, slapped a religious layer onto this whole, and we would have to go down to Elliott, Maine to go to the local Baha'i institution down there, and that would often take up a Saturday or a Sunday. And so it just got to the point where I never had a chance to develop my own motivational structure. It always was external, the impetus to go from one activity to the next. And I just feel like now in my adult life, I have to figure that out. My college experience was plagued with crazy procrastination, and I performed much poorer in college than I would have had I had a chance to develop a motivational structure. So, Brian, I want you to shoot that idea down, and then Chris, maybe you could rehabilitate it.
Well, it's not like you have to take like AP Chemistry, AP English, and AP Calculus or whatever. Like,
True.
And I mean, it seems like a lot of. I mean, obviously we are able to do the Substack here, which requires planning, and you have the broader the whole plan with the essays there.
Yeah. So it has been since I decided to start publishing weekly back in June, that has really laid bare the deficits in my motivational structure. That has really been the thing that's put me in contact, and why I've been talking about it on the podcast in the past month or two. It's really become obvious to me that I have to. It's a skill that I'm working on developing, getting ahead of the game with respect to these weekly essays versus trying to play catch up all the time. And some weeks I do better than others, but yeah, carry on.
I don't know, like maybe college is just stupid. Like when I went to college, like the first 2 years of classes were just so easy that you have like no choice but to not attend them and like party instead. and then all of a sudden you have classes that have to do work. So after like 2 years of procrastination, that's probably like what really the worst thing was. I don't know. I mean, if you I guess if you feel like you didn't cultivate all the skills, well, I mean, you're going to have a skill stack, right? So, I mean, but alternatively, like doing all those things, you do cultivate other skills that you do have. And I mean, it's not like your woes in life are caused by like a hefty burden of student loan debt. I mean, it's not like
it's true.
It's not like you've really been under. Otherwise, you're like a cogent and articulate person, and
Well, that's very flattering. I thank you for the compliment. But let me ask you this question, Brian. Did you suffer from procrastination? Do you find that your motivational structure is... do you have any issues with your motivational structure? I think you did suffer from procrastination in college, so I'm leading the witness a bit here. But
well, I mean, for the first 2 years, I didn't attend classes, like I was talking about. But well, I mean, like projects that. Well, I grind insurance claims professionally as a job, and that kind of thing works out well because you just, like having, 7 assignments per day that I just have to go through and do. It's way better than having a big long-term project. Although, I guess, I've been putting together this inbound subrogation playbook, which is terribly boring, but it's a guide as to how to review subrogation claims, and so I'm slowly building this thing up, and so I don't know, whatever it is you're complaining about, I don't really think like Huron Academy was like the cause of like any procrastination I did is like other structural issues, or I really wouldn't say Huron Academy. Like maybe my parents getting divorced when I was going through high school was a problem, And
You take a hit. The old battleship takes a hit on. Takes a while to roll back on the keel after that.
yeah, I mean, well, I guess I would say that we're like wildly fortunate to have gone to Hebron Academy, and basically, every kid fantasizes about going to Hogwarts, and that's basically what we did.
Oh my God, we did. We fucking did.
Yeah. So
I mean, I feel like the reality on the ground at Hebron, maybe not a 1-to-1 comparison with Hogwarts, but I take your meaning. It is like a British style public school. It comes from the same tradition, of the British tradition there. But
I mean, one thing I felt, one woe of going to Hebron Academy is just talking to like the denizens of like the Oxford Hills school system. They were all like terribly jealous of my Hebron Academy goings. It seemed.
Oh, interesting.
And they weren't. I don't know. It made them feel inferior or something.
I more or less lost contact with any of my local friends in Buckfield, where I grew up. Now I'm going to make it easy to identify myself if you go to look, but by going to Hebron, which was only 15 minutes away. But
you were closer then.
we were close.
Yeah.
But our issue was both my parents worked late, so we were stuck there till like 7 or 8 o'clock at night before we did all. But it's a similar experience. All the locals found out like we didn't go to the public school anymore. We went to Hebron, and suddenly we were different. We were outsiders. But also, when we got to Hebron, only about 10 or 15% of us were day students. So when I felt this strongly when I got to Hebron, I felt like a bit of an outsider because most of the people there were boarders, and they all lived together and did whatever weird Hogwarts shit they did at night. You've really got my mind spinning on that now. and this is one of the things I've talked about with my shrink is having to code switch like that, moving from, this is a self-assigned label, but moving from the affluent kid in Buckfield to the poor townie in that school. I don't want to say damaged me, but it changed me and it gave me some structure. It helps me code shift now. I feel quite capable of walking into very different environments, picking up on the room and going with the flow.
Yeah, I know that feel. Like I basically felt like the poorest kid at Hebron Academy, and then I would like back at the University of Maine when I was going to college. Well, my parents, I mean, they like bought me like a drum set, and all the other kids were like shocked by that, and I was like, dang, dude, this is just gonna be torment. No matter which way you go, there's just no winning.
So I'm interested. It's curious. It's fascinating to me to hear your two very different experiences. I don't want to be so lame to say that I'm going to split the difference with you, but I'll overshare and I'll warn you listeners now. Get some tissues ready. This is going to be hard. One of the reasons I lost my last job is some of the same things that you're talking about. One of the things that I struggle with today as an adult for a bunch of reasons is task initiation, task switching, and follow through. That last one is less clinical, but personally, when I am thinking
task
about
initiation and task switching. Okay.
Task initiation, task switching. I have ADHD. So one of the things that happens in my brain is when I need to get activated on a task or when I need to move my attention from one task to another task, I won't get into the whole neuropathy of it, but my brain, I have to do some things with my brain to get it off of a task and activate it on another task.
What would happen if you did not do the operations on your brain that you just described? You did not do the exercises, like before you ever went to therapy. Let's say you were just trying how things come naturally to you. You're working on task A. You're aware that you need to do task B.
Yep.
You find it impossible to switch lanes.
So here's the neuropathy as I understand it in a nutshell. All human brains have we talk about brains in terms of having brain centers, but those are sort of loosely affiliated clumps of tissue. Mm. So there's ways that neurologists can map brain activity. There's a region that they call the task positive network. So when any person is getting activated and physically working on a task or active engaged with a task, parts of the brain light up. And when that person is not working on a task, there's a region that activates called the default mode network, the DNN.
Yeah, I know this. Yeah,
and it's the default mode that is it's the parts of your brain where you're going to produce memories, you're going to do creative thinking. It's literally the difference between your mind focusing on the outside world and the inside world. And the issue with ADHD, one of the suspected issues is that the regulation that happens in a neurotypical person when they get activated on a task is their brain is able to suppress the DMN activity. So they stop fantasizing, they stop thinking, and they stop ruminating about the things that they're thinking about. They get activated on the task. Myself, one of the ways it impacts me is unless I can really shift my focus, I either stay thinking about the thing I was working on or I start thinking about other shit. My brain goes in all sorts of different directions unless I can take a few moments, put the old thing down, recenter myself, and focus on the next thing. One of the things that Hebron did for us that was great is it gave us a clear schedule. It gave us a list every hour, like down to the 15-minute increments of where we were going to be, what we were going to be studying. Because I struggle with some stuff, I had a special plan there where teachers gave me all of my homework assignments in writing on top of whatever they would say to you people verbally. I also got them written down in writing on paper to take home. So I was able to I got a wonderful schedule handed to me that made it clear when the thing was going to end and when I was going to switch tasks. So I was ready for it. It was clear to me how long that was going to be. And it was clear to me like what was due for that, what I had to work on that. And my issue was, because Hebron handed that to me, that was such a wonderful crutch, I lacked the ability when I came out of high school to create those things myself. And I still struggle with it today. As a manager of people, I really struggled with it. So when I had to sit a team of people down and take a big task and break it up into small tasks and get everybody motivated and working and then check their progress and pull it all together, that's a lot of fucking work for a brain, in my mind, that has to put so much energy into task switching. It's a thing that I still struggle with. And I don't know that I would put it at Hebron's feet, but I do think that as a young child, having that heavy structure handed to us probably trained our brains that the world will give you this kind of structure. So a thing that I genuinely struggle with when I am out in the world is if I show up at my job and my boss can't tell me what they want me to do, I'm lost and I lose that motivation to get engaged on something.
So you're complaining about Hebron Academy is they tailored themselves to your ADHD problem.
Yeah, like they gave me a really good crutch, and it worked. It got me through that school. It got me into college. Like I had no criticism. It worked, but I didn't develop it myself, so I didn't build the habit.
Now, I will never forget one fine day in 1998. You were in the English class after mine, Chris. And so I just remember that we had an English project due. It was like a Monday or something. And you showed up to class, you showed up to school with a blank piece of poster board, those big piece of poster boards used to make a presentation. And you were like, I got no problem whatsoever. I got 2 classes, then I got break, then I got a free period, then I got English class. And so I'll just use the half-hour break plus the 60-minute free period. 90 minutes should be good enough time to complete the project. And now I was in the class before, so when you were at free period, I was in the class giving my presentation. And I'll just never forget, we had a big long campus, and at one end was a student union where you could buy candy and junk food. And I'll just never remember being inside the building in which our English class was housed and being like, where is Chris? He's got this assignment he's supposed to be doing. He's only got 90 minutes to do it. The man is not here. He should be doing his project. And then you materialize coming waltzing down the path, and you had sacrificed 20 minutes of your 90 to get some refreshments from the student union. Yeah. It was the greatest example of procrastination I've ever seen in all my life. I was like, wow, that's a stressful walk out to the union.
That story should sound familiar to anybody who has an ADHD or in their life. Like with an impending deadline and having done no prep work, all I could think about was anything but. I was looking for a dopamine hit. I was looking to go eat some food to relieve some stress. I was probably super anxious and jacked up, and I was looking for food to have a positive emotional experience to calm down.
Well, Nate, you got a good story about playing Mech Warrior.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'll never forget. That it was maybe the same year. There was a real-time strategy game called Mech Commander, and Mech Commander 2 had dropped a demo. Back in the day, all the new games that were coming out would drop a demo that you could download and play a level or two to whet your appetite for the game. And I had an entire essay that was due. I hadn't started it, and I told my parents I'm going to have to stay up all night long to complete this project now. And I sat down at the computer only to discover that the Mech Commander 2 demo had dropped. And I was like, okay, I'll download the demo, but I won't play it. And I started typing away, but the minute the demo was downloaded, I fired it up, enjoyed a couple glorious hours, and submitted a deeply subpar essay the next morning at TOJ. So yeah, that was a bad one. I mean, it's like 10 o'clock at night, and you just have this thing that you procrastinated for so long, and I just wanted to play that Mech Commander 2 demo.
So that's an area where I think Hebron did prepare us for adult life, because your story about me sailing in that English assignment, I got a high grade on that. Yeah. If the story reminds me, if I remember the story right, and the only thing I can attribute that to is we developed some really good crisis management skills for how to manage time, how to get critical accomplishments done. And as gross as this sounds, how to read the person that we're submitting our work to, how to understand what it is that they're actually looking for, and how to give them something that's going to meet their expectations. That's corporate America.
Emergency room triage. I got 3 assignments due. I got an hour and a half to do them. Tomorrow. Yep. How are we going to whack this up?
You have to prioritize, right? One thing I took away from Hebron is stack ranking stuff, figuring out what was the most important, what is the biggest bang for my buck, either what was worth the biggest part of my grade or what was going to get me in the least amount of trouble if I missed. And that's maladaptive or not. That's a strategy I've applied to my working life.
Well, I'm disappointed that you're not just on my side, Chris, and it is not 2 against 1 here. But let me just ask you this little question. What's the home life for you? Because we were heavily scheduled by school and then also heavily scheduled at home. What's the other side of the coin for you looking like?
Happy and healthy. Both my parents worked. Neither of them were perfect people, but they created a really happy, stable home environment. Generally, when we were in the house, things were low key and not super structured. As long as the homework was done and the noise level was low, our parents were didn't let their stress and anxiety show. I think many parents at the end of their work days, they come home and weeknights are tough. They were really good about that. They were really good, wonderful people. They one of them's a Republican, one of them's a Democrat. They won't tell me which one's which.
That's very funny.
They have slightly different religious beliefs. They belong to slightly different sects of the same major world religion. And they're people who genuinely encouraged us to think about what we believe, articulate what we believe, and defend them. I think it's maybe his way to bring us back to Hebron and seek to close the pod. That's a skill set that I think people, libertarians, people in school, every human needs to be able to cultivate, is that idea, that power to reflect on what you believe, why you believe it, and sharpen your chisel.
Well, Nate, it sounds like you have some kind of expectation about what Hebron Academy should be. And I guess I just don't know. I mean, obviously Hebron Academy, it can't be this Band-Aid that you can put on any wound. And so I don't know. I guess maybe it could be better in some ways, but I don't know. I don't know exactly what you want to like. What the definitive statement about Hebron Academy is supposed to be.
What's the alternative for you? What would the alternative have looked like?
So yeah, we were exposed to a lot of I especially appreciated Mr. Gunn, our calculus teacher, who was unceremoniously fired the year before his pension kicked in a few years after our tenure at the aforementioned. But I just would have. I would have. It's okay to have rigorous schooling, but then your home life has to not be structured. Or you can have a rigorous home life, but then so I would have emphatically, if I ever had kids, I would structure their time as little as I possibly could. I would try to back off and let them get used to scheduling their own time. That's just the point I try to make here.
And I think that's what Hebron sold itself to for the vast majority of students. As a sleepaway boarding school, Hebron's whole product was selling to parents this idea that you can send your kids here and we'll structure their time, we'll cultivate their minds, we'll give them everything they need to operate. So that's one of the things that I feel like we were a little out of place as day students, because all that structure that we got during the day was also supposed to be coupled with warm and fuzzies and kumbaya and s'mores in the dorms. Day students got kicked out to go back to their homes, which mine was great.
Still set us apart that way.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, we have today, we have this podcast, and then we're going to visit our parents, and then we're going to visit the captain after that, who another former guest on this pod. And so just when I wake up in the morning and I just look at each of those 3 stops is going to be a lot of fun for me. But I'm still like, the whole day is blocked off. I don't have any freedom about the way that I spend my time, and that is. Even though I'm really going to enjoy each of the 3 stops today, I still chafed against having the entire day structured. I just can't. Because it bothered me when I was a kid, it's still bothers me to this day.
I get unsettled until my last thing is done.
Yes, yeah,
if I have something hanging over my head, I cannot relax until it's over. So if I have chores or obligations, I get them out of the way first thing. If I have to go to whatever it is, the bank, the grocery store, unless it's done, I'm thinking about it.
Yep. I hated working as a server for that reason. Going to work at 4 and 5. When I used to wait tables in college, and you're just the whole day is ruined if you've got the sort of Damocles hanging over your neck.
Okay, All right. Well, I guess that about wraps it up.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is usually the point in the podcast where I invite our venerable listeners to send us an email at nop@substack.com. You can let us know how your motivational structure is broken. We should certainly be honored to read it on the air if you send us a note. And also, if you want to read weekly essays written by yours truly, why log on to nop.substack.com, enter your email to sign up to get your essays delivered conveniently to your email inbox every Monday. And with that, I'll be back on Thursday with a recitation of this week's essay, and we will see you back here for the main pod 1 week hence. Have a great week, loyal listeners.
All right.